Okay, it looks like we've got a critical mass here. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to our rural outreach webinar. We are going to be doing 3 of these over the next few days. And so the good news for everybody tuning in this morning, you get the freshest information. You get the first cut at this as we pull several partners together to help make sure that we are providing the content, the information, the support that our rural businesses need to not only survive, but to thrive and position ourselves to bounce back very strong as we get through this COVID crisis. My name is Miles Hansen. I'm with World Trade Center Utah. In normal times, we exist to help Utah businesses increase their international sales. We work to attract international investment, facilitate international partnerships for our Utah companies. And as we're doing that, we're working to help enhance Utah's global brand. And during these COVID times, we've been serving as part of the governor's task force. We were asked to organize a federal committee focused on maximizing the benefit that federal programs and resources bring to Utah companies. And we're very, very fortunate to have many strong partners and organizations as part of that effort, including all of the organizations and all of our partners that we're going to be hearing from today. We organized a committee a couple of weeks ago. We quickly realized that our companies would need a couple things. One, access to up-to-date information that's been distilled down to the key bits of information that Utah companies need. We've got a team in place. Justin Anthony, who you will hear from in a few minutes, has been integral in that information gathering effort. Their charge has been to help save all of us from information overload by becoming experts in all the federal programs and resources, distilling that down into the key bits of information that Utah companies need. You know what the programs are, who is eligible, how you engage, and where you can go to get some one-on-one help. And then to get that information on the coronavirus.utah.gov/business website. We'll put that website in the chat box. So if any of you are not familiar with it, please go check it out. There are many, many federal programs and resources that will benefit your companies, yourselves or the companies that you're working with. So lots of good information there. The other thing we realized early on is that we would need to provide a way so that Utah companies could get one-on-one assistance, understand these programs, troubleshoot issues that arise. And so we organized a rapid response team. We put a call out to volunteers. We quickly had many, many volunteers say, hey, we want to plug in and support and help companies out during this challenging time. We now have more than 50 volunteers from 15 different organizations that are helping Utah companies. You can request assistance by going to the coronavirus.utah.gov/business website. There's a big link there where you can submit a request for help. You fill out your information based on the company, what your question is. That goes to the rapid response team. Within 24 hours, somebody will get back to you. That team is charged with not just providing information, but providing solutions and solving problems. And so you'll engage with somebody who they will call, email, text, whatever works best. But there'll be lots of back and forth to help companies get through the process, answer questions, and make sure that they are able to get what they need. We don't have magic wands. We can't solve problems. We know that there are significant challenges that our friends at the SBA are working on in terms of just managing the overwhelming flood of requests and applications. But what they can do is make sure that companies have good, smart advice about how to navigate that process. And so please, if you haven't yet, go to the website. If you're a business, request assistance. If you are somebody who, an economic development professional or a community leader, if you're working with businesses, please make sure that in your communities that is a known resource. We want to make sure that as many companies as possible take advantage of that. To date, just over the past couple of weeks, the team has helped more than 1,700 Utah small businesses. And so it's a significant effort. And we want to make sure that we continue to grow that number because that tells us that we are being successful in providing a service that is needed to our community. And so today we have a great program where we're going to break down some of these federal programs and resources that are available for businesses, particularly in rural areas. Many of the programs are agnostic in terms of where you are located. And so we'll talk about those and make sure that we are doing everything we can to make every rural small business owner aware of the programs and resources they can provide, tap into. There are other programs that are rural specific. And so we're going to hear about some of those programs as well today. And so let's go ahead and jump into the agenda. Very quickly, I will do a run through of what you can expect over the next 25 minutes or so. or 30 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A at the end. Any questions that you have, go ahead and punch it into the chat inbox there. Hannah on the World Trade Center Utah team, she'll be monitoring those, and she'll help moderate a discussion in our concluding 20 minutes or so. But we're going to have a chance to hear from Scott Albrecht with Senator Romney's team, Justin Anthony with Senator Lee's team, Marla Trollman and John Gigi with the SBA, Randy Parker with the USDA, and then Ryan Starks with GoEd. And so why don't we go ahead, and Scott, I'll kick it over to you. And then when you wrap up, why don't you go ahead and Justin, you can pick up right where Scott drops, where Scott ends up. Does that work for everybody? Okay, Scott, over to you.
Awesome, thank you. Well, we sure appreciate the invite and the opportunity to participate on this webinar. As mentioned, I'm the Central and Southwest Utah Director for Senator Mitt Romney. Just really love working with the rural parts of Utah. Know many of you and the business leaders. Hope you're doing well. Senator Romney sends his well wishes. He's been a tireless advocate for support and help for the small businesses in the country, in the state of Utah, and in rural. We've conducted several webinars with Utah League of Cities and Towns, UAC, Chambers of Commerce, Silicon Slopes, and others. And so we hope that we've been able to get the information out that's been helpful. Most of you are probably aware of the PPP program. I know Marla will go into more detail. We've spent the $350 billion for payroll that was allocated in phase 3, and that helped 15 million Americans stay on payroll. So it was a very successful program. We know it's not perfect, but it sure helped a lot of people. And so that has been replenished as of yesterday. The total bill is $484 billion, with $310 billion going to replenish the actual PPP program. A couple of things that were changed or added in this bill was that they've set aside $60 billion and ear tagged that to go towards small banks and credit unions and smaller institutions that are aimed at serving kind of the smaller businesses. And so we really hope that that will help those in rural Utah be able to access those funds and earmark those so they don't get gobbled up by maybe the bigger businesses or the bigger banks too quickly. That has passed, and so it'll go to the House within the next couple of days, and we hope to see that approved and that funding flowing to the banks and to the SBA, mid next week, just depending on how quickly the House passes the bill. The bill also includes $60 billion that goes towards the economic injury disaster loan. I know Marla will go into more detail, but $10 billion goes towards the grant and $50 billion goes towards the loan process. So those have been replenished and hopefully a good resource for you as businesses. Also $75 billion goes towards hospitals and $25 billion goes towards further testing. And so we're glad to have that pass through the Senate and hope it moves through the House quickly. The other thing I would mention is that I know the USDA has the food assistance program, and maybe Randy will go in that into more detail, but that's a $19 million program that will hopefully help our farmers and ranchers. The EIDL program is also opened up to the farmers and ranchers. Previously, they weren't allowed to apply, and now that they can. And so that's a huge win as well. Lastly, to wrap it up, I thought I'd make mention that you're aware that the president has put out an immigration ban. I think you'd be interested to note that from what we're hearing right now in our discussions is that the farm workers or the H-2A program would be exempt from that ban. And so hopefully that's good news for a lot of our rural partners. So anyway, I'll turn the time back over to Justin. If there's any questions, I'll put my contact information in the chat box, and feel free to reach out to our office if there's anything we can help with. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with all of you today, and huge shout out to the SBA and World Trade Center Utah for putting on these webinars. We're certainly a big fan of the webinars, especially with the amount of information that's constantly flowing from the federal and state and local levels. Being able to all come together and share that information with the city is essential. So my name is Justin Anthony. I serve as Senator Mike Lee's Business Out Director, more specifically serve as the liaison between the business community and the Senator. I work very closely with the Senator, our Chief of Staff, State Director, and our legislative team on any issue from any industry that has affected the business committee. So certainly a busy time, but one that has been a busy time for really our entire team. While we are working 100%, know several other of the congressional offices, if not all the congressional offices are, we've really shifted from going out and meeting with individuals in the community to Zoom calls, phone calls, Skype calls, FaceTime calls, texts, whatever it takes, because we certainly want to engage with as many Utahns as possible and be sure that we're serving as a resource to the community. So whether that's connecting with individuals with the right folks, whether it's providing information on bills, we want to be here and want to be helpful to everyone. Part of that, and Miles touched on this briefly as well, is the state and federal resource committees that exist within the Utah Economic Response Task Force. Our office, as well as Senator Romney's office and several other individuals in this call, and Miles Hanson actually chairing the Federal Resource Committee, have had the opportunity to collaborate with one another to not only make sure that all of that information is up to date and the most up-to-date information is getting to the business community, but also, as Miles had said, simplifying that down so that you're not having to read bills and pages of bill text to find out one program that will help your business. So a big focus has been working on matrices to understand these programs, working on who's eligible to receive these programs, and again, making sure that's all up to date is certainly a priority of ours. So we're very happy to be able to work with the team, very happy to be able to collaborate with the team to make sure that the business community. And I saw that the link did get put in the chat. Just to reiterate again, coronavirus.utah.gov/business. I cannot emphasize enough how great the information is on there. It is a lot, but there's certainly a lot out there to be able to comprehend. So that's updated quite regularly, just to reiterate that as well. Last week, Senator Lee was appointed to the Opening Up America Again congressional group. The goal of this group is to advise and assist the president to help local and state governments navigate the process to safely reopen their economies when they are ready to do so. Senator Lee taking this serious and certainly working with his colleagues and the president to make sure that Utah's voice is being heard. And part of that, we really encourage Utahns to go to our website, lee.senate.gov, to submit any feedback that they have. There's quite a few different things that need to be thought through as we go through this process. We opened this about 4 days ago and have already received hundreds of comments, and it could be anything from suggestions, things to consider, concerns that individuals have, but we really encourage you to get there, going through there and compiling it all into a list and getting that over to the senator so that he can take a look at that as he's talking with his colleagues and with the president. One quick thing I wanted to touch on the funding package, as Scott had mentioned. The Senate passed that bill yesterday, the tune of $484 billion. Senator Lee actually jumped on a plane on Monday and flew back to Washington to be there for the vote yesterday. He wanted to talk with the colleagues that were in DC, as well as give a floor speech, and the floor speech can be found on our website at lee.senate.gov as well. But the senator had two major concerns that he brought forward that I wanted to flag for everyone today. One of them being the way in which this bill has been written, with the specific leadership within Congress and the administration. Senator see, did my Wi-Fi cut out there? Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you, Justin.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, going back, I'm not sure where I cut out, but certainly the concern with the bill being written within leadership, it doesn't give the power for members of Congress who represent other states to have their voice heard and have their concerns of their state being heard. So Senator Lee is advocating for members of Congress to come back to Washington, D.C. and be there to negotiate the process and also take the votes. That's the other concern that Senator Lee had, was that we're passing a $500 billion bill and members of Congress aren't there. There are only a few members that were within the chamber. And so certainly Senator Lee did not block the passage of the bill. I just want to clarify that. But those were the two frustrations that he expressed. And we're hoping, as we start exploring and the conversation starts quickly picking up of a phase 4, that members of Congress will be in DC to be able to negotiate that as a body and vote in person. So with all that, certainly if there's anything our office can do, please let me know. Our office, again, wants to be a resource.
Okay, it looks like we've lost Justin again, but it was helpful to get that perspective from Senator Lee. Like, two key takeaways that I think every small business in the state, especially here in rural Utah, should have in mind from this one is that Senator Romney and Senator Lee are very much engaged in the policy process in Washington, D.C., and Scott and Justin are available to plug in and be supportive for the challenges that you're facing. So please reach out to them. We can make sure that you have access to their contact information. But I've seen in several companies that come through the rapid response team, there have been several times where Team Lee and Team Romney have jumped in to engage and have been very, very helpful for that. So those are two resources that we want to make sure our companies are aware of and utilizing. So with that, let's jump into the meat and potatoes part of our session, if you will. Marla Trollin she's the district director for the SBA. Many of you know her very well. She and John Gigi are doing phenomenal work. They've been integral in this rapid response team and building that, the scope of work and getting it trained up. And they are doing everything they can, operating around the clock to help as many companies as possible participate in these federal programs and resources. So Marla, at this point, I'll send it over to you. And I know that you've got some details to provide to everybody listening in today. Okay, Marla, we can see your screen, but you may still be on mute. So if you could unmute yourself, then we can go ahead and hear as you kind of introduce the slides that you're going to be running us through.
Okay, can you hear us now?
Yep, got you now.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Well, good morning, everyone. And thank you, Miles, for you and your staff for hosting us this morning, along with the SBDC network. We really appreciate it. I have with me, as you mentioned, John Gigi. He's our district counsel here on staff. But I also want to thank Randy Parker at the USDA and Ryan Starks at GoEd for participating in these webinars and reaching out to rural communities across the state. I'm going to just launch into the different funding options that we have available. I know most everyone has heard, of course, the funding has run out, but as Scott mentioned, the CARES Act has been amended, passed the Senate, it's going to the House hopefully today. And that includes, as Scott said, $310 billion additional for the PPP program, or the Paycheck Protection Program. It includes $50 billion for the emergency injury disaster loans that we have, $10 billion for the emergency grants, and I'll dive into that in a little bit here. And in addition to that, as Scott had mentioned, it also includes agricultural enterprises now that are eligible for the economic injury disaster loans. And that's new. They weren't eligible before, so we're very pleased to see that. Keep in mind, too, that farmers and ranchers can also apply under the PPP program. So next slide. Oh, and I did want to mention real quick, of the $349 billion that had been allocated nationwide for the PPP program, our Utah numbers were $3.7 billion of that went to small businesses here in the state with 21,000 loans. I know there are a lot of other applications that are still in the queue and that are waiting to be processed. So as funding comes forward, they will be working on those. So I'm just going to run through the PPP program. The funding is administered by our SBA lenders. We had about 70 lenders here in the state that we worked with directly. Now we're up over 200. So big shout out to those lenders that have jumped on board to help administer this PPP program. This loan is 100% guaranteed, and it's primarily meant to be used for payroll costs, as probably most of you already know. That includes salaries and wages for employees of $100,000 or less. Now, anything of an employee that earns over $100,000, the forgiveness portion of it just covers up to that $100,000 limit. It can also be used for vacations, sick leave, severance, healthcare benefits, retirement benefits. A portion of it can also be used for mortgage interest payments, rent, utilities, and interest on pre-existing debt. So one of the things I also wanted to mention is for those of you that may have already received an economic injury disaster loan, or what we call EIDL, you can roll that over into the PPP loan and get most of it forgiven. And I'll jump into the forgiveness benefits in a minute. The eligible entities for the PPP include small businesses. Again, highlight here to the agricultural businesses, ranchers and farmers. It also includes tribal businesses, nonprofits, 501c3s, sole proprietors, independent contractors, and self-employed individuals. The size standards for this is 100 or 500 employees or less, but you can also, we base it on the NAICS code standard too, so that's something else to keep in mind. The number of employees includes full-time, part-time, and others, but it doesn't include independent contractors because those folks can apply separately. We have waived a lot of parameters under this, and I'm going to touch on that in just a minute. But we're also waiving the franchises listed in the SBA's franchise directories, and we can dive into that if anyone has questions on it. Just quickly, ineligible entities include financial businesses engaged in lending, passive businesses, life insurance companies, pyramid sales, distribution plans, gambling, etc. Of course, anyone engaged in illegal activity, and small businesses with 20% or more owners with legal issues. So just something to keep in mind. Again, John can touch on this in more detail if there's any questions. Loan terms, next slide, please. The amount of these loans goes up to $10 million. We base it on a formula and not projections. So it's 2.5 times the applicant's average monthly payroll cost over the last 12 months. And if a business has been operating less than a year, then we're going to look at the January and February of 2020, your payroll cost for those 2 months. The maturity for this loan is different than the EIDL, where the maturity only goes up to 2 years. And the interest rate is also different. It's 1%. With a payment deferment for the first 6 months. Next slide. Again, multiple loans. So I know some folks have applied for the EIDL along with the emergency grant, and you can't have the PPP and the EIDL for the same purpose, generally for payroll. So keep in mind when you're looking at the 2 different loans, but you can, like I said, roll it over your EIDL loan into the PPP if you want to look at the forgiveness benefits for that. The eligibility, again, PPPs are administered by our SBA lenders, and so the lender is going to look at whether or not you've been in operation on or before February 15th. So say you just open your business in March, that's going to be problematic for you under the PPP program. And then you have to show that you've been paying salaries and payroll taxes. You'll need to demonstrate that to the lender. Let's see, I'm not going to get into that. Let's just go to the next one. What the things that we're waiving here. So we are waiving both the guarantee fee and the actual or the annual lender fee, as well as the credit elsewhere requirement. Credit elsewhere is required under EIDL, whereas under the PPP it is not. So again, that's a difference between the two loans. We're also waiving collateral and personal guarantee requirements and prepayment penalties under the PPP. It is 100% SBA guaranteed. And probably the most important aspect of the PPP is the forgiveness benefits that apply. So they're going to look at the 8-week period from the initial loan disbursement, taking into account money spent on payroll costs, mortgage interest, rent, utilities. And then the borrower must supply that documentation, including payroll tax filings, state filings, verification of mortgage and utility payments, along with a certification from its representative. Payroll costs must account for 75% of the requested forgiveness amount. Again, very important to keep in mind. If the business, this is just examples here, if a business reduces its number of employees or compensation during the 8-week period, then the amount of forgiveness will be reduced. If employers restore their employment numbers by June 30th, they will not have any reduction in their forgiveness. So keep that in mind when you're looking at bringing back the employees. Now I'm going to just quickly touch on the EIDL, or the economic injury disaster loans. Again, an added benefit of the legislation that they're looking at running through the House right now is that we've added in agricultural enterprises, which includes 500 employees or less. So that's important to keep in mind. We're going to look at the SBA size standards, again, 500 employees or less, or the NAICS code, as I mentioned before. This is also nonprofit organizations are eligible. There is a credit elsewhere requirement. So again, different than the PPP. The loan terms, these amounts go up to $2 million versus the $10 million under the PPP. The interest rate under the EIDL is also higher. It's 3.75 for small businesses and 2.75 for nonprofits. The maturity, again, is different. It goes up to 30 years versus the 2 years under the PPP. Let's see. So the economic injury disaster loans proceeds can be used for similar things, but again, you can't have two loans to cover payroll. But if you're just getting the EIDL, you can use it for fixed debts, payroll, accounts payable, and other bills. But it can't be used to refinance long-term debt. Again, there's no credit elsewhere, the credit elsewhere requirement will be considered, as well as you must have acceptable credit history and you must be able to demonstrate that you can make the payments. All loans over $25,000 must be secured with available collateral. Let's see, so there's no cost to apply, and there's some information here in terms of the 1-800 number and emails. You can always reach out to us directly and we can give more information on that. Let's go to the next one real quick. So the emergency grants, again, this funding has been increased under the legislation that just passed the Senate, another $10 billion for the grants. These go up to $10,000. It's been based on $1,000 per employee. It's covering the period of January 31st through December 31st. And typically we've been trying to issue them within 3 days of application. I know that some of our small businesses here in Utah have not received the funding that quickly, but SBA is getting a new process in place that will get that funding out more quickly. Eligible entities under the grant include small businesses, private nonprofits, small agricultural co-ops, and self-certified individuals. The waivers under the grants include personal guarantees, 1 year in business requirement. It can be used for payroll, paid sick leave, paying rent, mortgage payments, etc. And it will be based on your credit score. So again, something important to keep in mind. I know some businesses have wondered why they didn't get the grant, but that will be taken into account. Next slide.
Hey, Marla. Hey,
Yeah,
Marla,
sure.
I just want to, we've gotten a lot of questions about the EIDL loans and grants. And just wanted to clarify real quick. So on that last slide, we talked about the EIDL grant and then using your credit score to qualify to determine if you can repay it. Can you clarify on the $10,000 or the $1,000 per employee? Is that something that companies apply for separately if they receive it? It's a grant. They don't need to repay it, or is that in advance of an EIDL loan?
Yeah, so it's meant to be in advance of an EIDL loan, right? To just tide them over while they're waiting for the loan to get processed and the funding to hit their bank accounts. So that they will take that into account, but keep in mind the grant is what it is meant to be, which is there's no payment on it. It's basically free money, so to speak, but it will be reduced from the loan that you're going to get through the EIDL or even the PPP.
So it's all one application process for the grant and the loan. It's just one application process. Really what you're doing is applying for the loan. They'll give you the grant up front. And so it's all the same analysis. The credit score really goes to whether you qualify for the loan. And they've lowered the requirements on the credit scores a little bit for these situations.
And so just and again, I apologize for harping on this, but through the rapid response team and elsewhere, we're getting a lot of questions about this. So just to provide an example, if I'm a small business, I have 10 employees, and I apply for let's say $100,000 economic injury disaster loan. I get the $10,000 advance. I'm sorry. Yeah, the $10,000 advance. And then my loan is approved and I get a loan for $90,000. But the loan is, I have to pay back the $90,000. That's part of the loan. But the grant, the $10,000, that's separate. That's money I get to keep, but I don't have to pay that back. Is that correct?
That's accurate.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that for everybody.
Sure, you bet. So it's kind of clarified on this next slide, but anyway, we don't need to dive into that any further unless there's questions. So why don't we just go to the last slide here? I just wanted to provide our main call-in line, and again, we're monitoring that as frequently as possible. Thanks again to Miles and his team for helping us set up the rapid response team. As he said, I think they've received 1,700 inquiries. A lot of those are SBA inquiries. And so we're getting back to small businesses as quickly as we can. So you can call that main line. You can also email utahgeneral@sba.gov. And some of those inquiries are going to be forwarded to the rapid response team if my staff can't get to it right away. And again, the rapid response team is handling general inquiries. We're handling the technical inquiries on our staff. The Office of Disaster Assistance is the one that administers the EIDL loans and grants. And so a lot of businesses have contacted us asking us to look into the status of their application or the status of their grant. We're not able to do that, or we haven't been to date. They did just set up a new portal now where we ought to be able to go in more often, providing that portal stays up and running. So hopefully we'll be able to look that up for business owners. But anyway, I think that's it in a nutshell. And we can answer questions once everyone is done with their presentation.
Great. Thank you, Marla and John, for that overview and also everything that you and your teams are doing right now. I know that it has been incredibly overwhelming, and you all are doing a phenomenal job. So thank you for that. Okay, now we're going to turn some time over to Randy Parker, who runs the U.S. Department of Agriculture operations here in the state of Utah. Has been a great partner, very much involved in our effort. And after Randy, we'll go ahead and hear from Ryan Starks with the Governor's Office of Economic Development to talk about some of the state-specific sources of support that our companies can receive. So Randy, over to you.
All right, thank you, Miles. I guess one slight correction, there's a whole lot to USDA. I'm the State Director of Rural Development, and as you noted earlier, we are one of those pieces of this rapid response that is rural specific. We service rural communities. And the first thing I want to note is we are open for business. We have 8 offices around the state. Our staff, excuse me, our staff are taking care of business, but we're doing it in a different way. It is online, but we are taking care of business. Second, I want to note that with the changing landscape because of the coronavirus, the most up-to-date information available on USDA rural development is at this website, rd.usda.gov/coronavirus. That's where all the updates are posted. I'm going to give an update on a number of things today, our 3 major program areas, but to get to the most up-to-date information, that will be where it's at because things are changing. First, I'd like to note that our housing programs continue to be working and available to help people into affordable housing in rural Utah. There are a number of things that have happened that are related to the coronavirus. Our single family housing, our direct and guaranteed loans in rural communities around the state has provided a 60-day moratorium on evictions and foreclosures, and up to 180 days of forbearance. So it gives more time for those families to deal with loss of jobs or whatever. Our multifamily housing units that USDA has guaranteed the financing on, we've increased the amount for our tenant vouchers to help them get through this difficult time. Eviction and penalty protection are in place for non-payment to help them as well. And we're also including forbearance and extension of payments for the property owners. So it's working on both sides of that multifamily housing ledger out in rural Utah. Our rural utilities programs, when we work with communities on sewer and water systems, with our loan guarantees, the lender that we've guaranteed with may offer up to as much as 180 days in payment referrals for those communities. And we've extended deadlines for applications for our telecom and our electric programs. Our rural business cooperative service programs, including our business and industry and Rural Energy for America loan guarantee programs, again, 180 days of loan deferrals. And we've extended application dates for participating in those programs. Now, as far as the CARES Act and how that original legislation applied to USDA, I've got a few things that I wanted to pass along. First, our business and industry guaranteed loan program was given an additional $1 billion in lending authority. And the repayment term was increased to 10 years. The repayment schedule may be deferred up to 12 months, and the terms of that may be extended as an additional 3 years if necessary. Eligible loan purposes under the USDA Business and Industry Guarantee Program include payroll, healthcare benefits, rent, lease, utilities, etc. Again, in the area of the CARES Act, our Reconnect program, which is what RD is working with communities and providers to expand broadband into rural Utah and rural America. We received an additional 100 million for grants. That the priority for that 100 million will be for first round applicants in FY19 that were not funded under our first 300 million of grant and loan authority. Our distance learning and telemedicine grant program received an additional 25 million to extend telemedicine and educational opportunities in rural Utah and America. That's in addition to the 70 million of grants that was already available. And the window for applications was increased and is open now from April 14th to July 13th. So that's kind of our quick rundown of the things we're trying to do to help rural communities. We work with rural communities in a holistic way, from housing, sewer and water and other infrastructure, broadband, and even services like emergency response vehicles. All of those are still operating as if we hadn't been hit by this crisis. It's just in a different way. And again, that website is rd.usda.gov/coronavirus. Thank you to the World Trade Center and the great partners we have in Utah to help rural Utah and businesses across our state. Thanks, Miles.
Great. Thank you, Randy, for that overview. And Ryan Starks, over to you on some of the state and resources that exist thanks to the good work happening at GoEd.
Thanks, Miles, and thanks to everybody who's contributing. I love this teamwork mentality. It's great to see so many people come together. From the state group, we don't have these large resources like everybody else has been talking about. Our billions are more like millions and thousands. And so I'll just highlight a few of the programs that we've launched, really with the purpose of bridging the gap to help many of our small businesses get to the point where they can receive the SBA funding. So first, I just wanted to talk about a program that the legislature and the governor's office approved and supported. It's a small grant program to businesses throughout Utah. GoEd became the administrator of that program. And we opened up the application in 2 separate rounds. So this is called the Utah Works Together Bridge Program. In the first round, we dedicated $6 million to small businesses. But we also said that of the $6 million, 25% needed to go to rural Utah. So we worked around the clock. We received the applications, built an application portal, and we're able to get out 502 checks and allocate the first $6.1 million. And the nice thing about that is 27% of all of that funding went to rural Utah. So then we had some lessons learned from the first round that we wanted to incorporate into the second round. That second round just ended at the end of last week. So over the weekend and all the way up through this morning, we're grading applications. This morning we made the final recommendations. So we allocated the remaining $6 million to 640 small businesses. And really happy to announce that 33.3% of all the funding went to rural businesses. And this is from every county imaginable. So we're considering any county rural that's off of the Wasatch Front. 5.2% of these funds went to nonprofit organizations, and 12.1% went to healthcare organizations. So our process now is to contact each of these businesses, have them sign a contract, and then we can have the check sent in the mail this Friday. Typically, the funding goes anywhere between $5,000 and $20,000. So each business would make an application based on their need, and then we tried to score accordingly. So we're really grateful for the results, grateful for all the support that we got. However, we recognize that it's not enough. If we had more money, we would give that money out in a heartbeat. So we are working with the legislature to identify potential other sources of funding that could potentially replenish this pool of money, whether that be a set aside from this federal stimulus or whether it be state legislative monies. So we're having that conversation. And a couple of other things. We're working with the Utah Association of Counties to launch a statewide revolving loan fund through the EDA. So the Economic Development Administration has some money set aside that they would like to give to the states. So UAC has agreed to take that on. And so they're applying for this money. It would be a low interest loan program, favorable terms, and hopefully if they get that money, they can start loaning it out sooner than later. A couple of other ideas. The legislature is in special session, as many of you know. And so they asked our office, what are some things that we can do to stimulate the economy? How can we best serve our business community? So we gave them a list full of recommendations, but two that I wanted to highlight today are one, to create a shop local first, or a shop local Utah first campaign, where we would across the state remind people that they can take some of their stimulus money and that they can reinvest it back into our small businesses. And this could be billboards, it could be digital ads, it could be TV interviews, just things to encourage people to give back to our businesses that give so much to us. And the second part is we've made a specific ask to help our SBDCs and many of our business outreach partners have the tools necessary to train many of our businesses. We think that we're going to have a flood of businesses going to our PTAC centers or our SBDCs or our BRCs, our business resource centers. And I think that would be a great thing. The more that we can equip them to rebound from this economic downturn, the better off we're all going to be. And then finally, SB 3006. This is a bill that came out during this special legislative session. The Senate's already voted on it. The House is looking at it this week. It would be a new program to provide some relief funding for commercial businesses who are renting or leasing. And so it would be an assistance program to help them out. We don't know all the details exactly what it'll look like. We're following it closely though and think that it has enough support. And that would be a program administered by GoEd, to where if a company's having a hard time paying their commercial lease or commercial rent, they could apply for assistance. And again, it would be a very quick turnaround from our end. So. Any questions?
No, that's great. Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate that. I see there are a few questions in the chat box. We can get to that here in just a minute. Just a final pitch real quick on some additional resources that apply to companies who have or are interested in engaging in international trade. So World Trade Center Utah, we administer the STEP grant program, the State Trade and Export Promotion Grant Program. These are grants of between $2,000 to $10,000 to small businesses in the state to help them engage internationally. And so for companies, maybe you've had challenges with a manufacturer in China or a distributor, Canada or Mexico, please reach out to us. We can provide these grants to help offset the cost of engaging internationally, to help you find partners internationally, to help with website optimization, to increase your ability to sell online. And you can go to WTCutah.com. We have all the grant information there. We also have a USDA grant program specifically focused on rural companies. And so there's a lot of resources. We also do free consultations, market research, and through our global network, we can connect you with just about anybody you need to connect with in other markets. And so these are resources that we use all the time. But what we found over the past month and a half is our businesses are facing unprecedented challenges, that there's even increased demand for these services, just given how international our economy is. So with that overview, thank you, everybody, for providing that information. Let's jump into the Q&A. And Hannah, I know you've been keeping an eye. There's a lot of questions coming through. We've tried to answer a few of them in the chat box. But Hannah, why don't you go ahead and moderate the Q&A for us now? Thank you. And Hannah, it looks like you are on mute. There we go.
Let me fix that. Okay. I got a question emailed to me. Their business is just getting started and they're wanting to know if any loans or grants are available for a small business with no year-to-year comparison or employees.
So Marlon, John, what do you think about that situation? What advice would you have for that company?
Yeah, so we still have our traditional 7A loans, and they are certainly eligible to apply for that, as well as our 504 loans. So, you know, if they reach out to us, we can provide that information to them.
And important to remember on that is SBA also has this new subsidy program. So any loan made under our regular programs in the next 6 months, the first 6 payments will be automatically made by the SBA itself. So you won't have to make the first 6 payments.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So this question is, where do we apply for the grants? Would that just be the portal, the COVID-19relief.sba.gov, or is that a different place?
That's the place where they would. Just be aware it's not live right now because the funding has been suspended until this next round is passed and they're up and going again.
And keep in mind, that's also the site where you go in and apply for the EIDL, the loan itself. So like John had mentioned, it's one portal where you go in and apply for both the emergency grant and the loan.
And as you're going through the loan, go ahead.
Nope, go ahead, and then I'll follow up.
I was just going to say, as you go through the EIDL loan application process, there will be a screen in there where you elect to get the $10,000 grant.
Up to.
Up to. Yeah.
And this is Ryan. I was just going to add, because I know we've only mentioned it 3 or 4 times, so I thought I'd do it one more time, that the coronavirus.utah.gov webpage has real-time updates. So we're able to take over kind of the back end populating the site. And so anytime we have an update, whether it be at a county level or a city level or even a state or a federal level, we have links and pages back to all the resources. So there's a little box that says federal resources, state resources, local resources. And if you were to kind of peruse each of these boxes, you could find more information about all of the programs that we've discussed today.
Let's go on to our next question. And that is, if they have a seasonal business and payroll covers approximately 6.5 months per year, an average payroll over 12 months would be almost half of the actual payroll costs, what should they do?
Well, interestingly enough, last week we were on a phone call with the national ski industry. So they were concerned about this same type of thing because, of course, now their season's over and they lose all their employees. And so I know they've made a big push to reach out to their congressional representatives so that there could be some change to the act. So that's taken into account. Right now, it's a difficult situation because there are some set parameters in the PPP policies. But
great. Does taking and using the $10,000 advancement for EIDL need to be rolled or refinanced into a PPP? And would it bar you from the PPP?
No, so that grant is, like I had said before, you don't have to pay it back. However, it will be subtracted from either the EIDL or the PPP loan, whichever one you apply for. So just keep that in mind. So for example, if you apply for $100,000 PPP loan, and say you got $10,000 in the grant, that $10,000 would be subtracted, so you're only going to get $90,000.
And because it's a grant, it's not rolled over into the loan.
No.
Yeah.
Great. What is necessary to show or prove no credit elsewhere?
Basically, that requires that you show that credit is not available elsewhere on reasonable terms and conditions. So there's some niceties to that. It's kind of hard to explain all of it here, but
can you give some examples?
And just because you have, for example, open lines of credit or other things, that won't automatically disqualify you. It's based on a totality of your overall credit picture. So it's circumstantial. So just, put together your best presentation on that for when they'll come back and ask you for that information after you've put your initial application into the EIDL loan.
Great. Someone was following up on the seasonal business question. They were hit hard before actually applying for the PPP. Do any of the PPP funds count towards previously paid employees in March before they applied? The application process, asked for payroll from February 15th to June 30th, and they're wondering if the funds can be applied during that period.
Well, I mean, you have to look at it from a couple, in determining what the amount of the loan will be, they go over the last 12 months and average that. Except for seasonal employees, they use a different formula. So that formula will be used for the 12 months previous to applying for the loan. Then actually calculating the payroll costs on the back end when you're applying for the forgiveness is another thing. I don't know if I answered that question totally. I don't know if I understood it fully, but.
So I think, John, as I look at the question, you've got a company and you are applying, you get the PPP loan 2.5 times your average monthly payroll. You get that money into your company. You've already spent, at this point, they may have already spent money on payroll through March and up until now in April. They get the PPP loan. Can they, in terms of the forgiveness element, can they apply what they've already paid on payroll before getting the loan towards what they're using the loan for? And that's my understanding is that, no, it's once you receive it, you've got 8 weeks going forward to spend it. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Yes,
Yes.
8 weeks from the initial disbursement of the loan to you. So that's the 8-week period to look at. Now be aware that if you've got people that you have let go before then, you can bring them back on, or you can be paying them even though you're not open for business. It might be worth it to you to pay them so that you can get forgiveness of that portion of the loan.
Yep, and just to amplify that last point, the purpose of the PPP loans in many ways is to keep people on payrolls. And so we've had a lot of companies come back and say, hey, I'm shut down, or I'm down, I'm only operating at 15%. It doesn't make sense for me to bring people back on. But that's what the program is designed to do. It's designed to give you the funding you need to cover payroll, even if there's not right now a business case to justify those payroll expenses. And that's why what you're spending on payroll will be forgiven, but it is moving forward. And so businesses need to be strategic about when they accept the loan. You apply, the loan gets approved. You can choose the day that you're actually receiving the funding. And so you want to take a look at your payroll schedule and accept the loan at a point where you're going to maximize what you can spend over an 8-week period, because it is 8 weeks from the day you receive the funding. And so you can sit down and figure out, what day do I want to take the loan in my payroll cycle so I can maximize the benefit of this loan and the forgiveness that you'll receive during that 8-week window?
We have to clarify on that, because the lender is required to make the initial disbursement within 10 calendar days of when the loan is approved. So your 8 weeks is going to start within 10 days after your loan approval.
Right. And one other point, I know I mentioned this earlier, but just to reemphasize this, that employers that restore their employment numbers and salaries by June 30th would experience no reduction in forgiveness. And this applies to reductions that occurred between February 15th and April 26th.
Now, one other thing I would like to mention, if you have a lot of these questions about payroll costs and seasonality and other things, I noticed that on the line today, we do have a lot of our Small Business Development Center directors who are located throughout the state. And so we encourage you to go visit with them quickly too, if you've got any questions about how to develop that payroll cost base when you go to apply for these loans.
Okay, Hannah, I think we've got time for one more question.
Okay, sorry. Is the payroll forgiveness what is actually paid during the 8-week period, or what was earned by the employee over the 8-week period?
It's based on actual expenditures that you've made on payroll costs and those other items like mortgage, rent, utilities. So it's based on those actual expenditures that are made.
Great. Thank you, everybody. We're going to go ahead and wrap things up. We see that there are still many questions in the queue that haven't been answered yet. And so a couple of things. One, Hannah's going to take a look at those. And when we do our 2 o'clock session today, we're going to make sure that we hit those during the presentations part of the program. And if not, we'll make sure we put those at the top of the queue. Recognizing that many of you, it's just been an hour with us. You're not going to want to go ahead and jump on at 2 o'clock. We strongly encourage you to utilize the resources that exist to help you get this one-on-one counseling and advice. Again, you can go to coronavirus.utah.gov/business and see a really helpful overview of all the federal, state, and local programs that exist. Like John just mentioned, we have the SBDC networks across the state. Reach out to them, engage them. They're here to help provide solutions on this, but also many other things. And then finally, the rapid response team is very quick, easy, efficient. Go there, submit your question to them. A member of the team will dig in. If they don't know the answer right away, they'll do some research and they'll get back to you and make sure that they are giving you good, accurate advice and to help you make decisions as you move forward. So again, thank you to everyone for being with us this morning. We're grateful for the SBDC network, for all the work that they're doing across the state, and for all of our partners who've been on the call today. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up, and we wish everybody a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Miles.